Hey everyone, I'm Amy Connell. Thanks for tuning into Lessons to My Teenage Self. This is the shortcut you need to thrive in your physical, mental, and spiritual health. As a personal trainer and nutrition coach, I'm passionate about empowering you to find your best version of health. Each week, we dig into one topic that I wish I had known as a teen. We are continuing our series on intuitive eating. Remember, these are all episodes I originally did on my Graced Health podcast. If you would like to hear the full version, go over to the Graced Health podcast, season 21, to listen. Let's jump into my episode with registered dietitian Kristin Williams on Challenge the Food Police. Kristin, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Amy.
Well, it was so fun to have you here. Let me tell you really quickly about Kristin. She's a registered dietitian and certified eating disorder specialist with a private practice in Dallas, Texas. Kristin helps people to experience freedom with food using an intuitive eating and non-scale focused approach. She's passionate about incorporating the Christian faith into the process for those who are interested and helping her clients to reclaim their worth from a number on the scale. Amen, amen, amen to that. Kristin. Okay, let's talk about Challenge the Food Police. First, give us a broad explanation of what this is.
So the way I describe the food police is it can either be an internal voice in our heads or an external voice from society, culture, family of origin, friends group. Most of the time, I think we're experiencing a combination of both. We're hearing external food polices, and then we also have one that likes to hang out in our brains from time to time. And the way I like to describe the food police is it's really this annoying voice with food rules. Do's, don'ts, goods, bads, lots of shame, and just overall not a helpful voice.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like at this stage in my life, who I'm really getting the food police from is Instagram.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
There's a lot of stuff on there.
And it honestly, I mean, that's a perfect example. I can't think of a better one. It just adds typically to the mental noise that we're already experiencing because most of us already have a food police in our head. So it's just adding to that, soundtrack of the noise of the do this, do that, all the things. And I'm sure we'll get there, but it's all in an attempt to control, which often leads us feeling out of control and shame.
Right. So with regard to the food police and taking out the don't eat, never eat, you should, all of that kind of stuff. And so I know that a big concern among women, especially those who have been abiding by diet rules, is, well, if I eat whatever I want, then won't that lead to weight gain?
Mm-hmm.
I have to imagine this is something that you hear in your private practice, and I would love for you to speak to that.
Yeah, I get that question all of the time. And people even being confused about the process of intuitive eating of, well, if I don't listen to these rules, and just to give your listeners an example of, rules of the food police, it might be don't eat past 7:00 in the evening. And a lot of times people don't even know where the rule came from. They're like, I just heard it or I saw it on Instagram. It sounded like a good idea. So I added it to the list to follow. Another example might be, I don't know, a rule regarding physical activity for something that you ate in order to give yourself permission to eat, or a rule about carbohydrates. So a lot of times clients will have these rules either subconsciously or consciously in an effort to control their eating intake, in an effort to control their weight. So the idea, I'll oftentimes have clients list, like, let's list as many rules as you can come up with. And it's funny because often they'll be like, well, I can think of like 2 or 3. And then we start talking, or they, go home and I say, email them to me. And they're like, okay, it ended up being 50, because we have so many that we don't even think to challenge. Yeah. They're just floating around in our minds. When people feel like, well, I'm quote unquote failing at my eating, their assumption is that the solution is to add more rules. But I try to encourage clients to consider the fact that food restriction actually creates food interest. So the more, if I can't have chips and queso, the more I'm probably thinking about chips and cake. I feel like we talked about Oreos at some point in our last conversation. The rule might be I can have Oreos, but only 2. And I want the rule because it feels safe. I feel controlled knowing that I'm going to have just 2. And then what happens if I have a third? It feels like we know, realistically, a third Oreo is not that big of a deal. Like, you're going to be fine.
Right.
But for someone that has that food police running around in their mind, they've just broken this rule. And most of the time, if you've broken the rule, there's that sense of guilt and shame. I'm a failure. Might as well eat all of the Oreos because I ate 3. And so oftentimes it sets people up to then feel out of control around food. And we think falsely that the solution is more rules. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Right. Going back to your original question of people are scared that they're going to be out of control with food, they're going to gain weight if they don't have these food rules, when in reality what you're doing is you're taking the shininess, if you will, out of the Oreos. So then you have the freedom to say yes to them because you're not dieting, but you have the freedom to say no. It's not, I have to say no. I should say no. Saying no is the right thing. It's, I have the freedom to say no if I don't want them. And so over time, you're kind of taking the shininess out of the Oreos. But oftentimes, when we have less food rules, our eating just kind of naturally balances itself out a little bit better. And it's usually the more food rules we have, the more out of control we tend to feel in time with our eating. So it backfires, really.
Okay. Now I want to take this concept of challenging the food police, which I think in concept sounds wonderful to so many of us. But then layer that on with some of the nutritional information that we do know. So how do we deal with this food police of like, oh, you really shouldn't be having, this has been sitting on your shelf for 3 months. You shouldn't have this because this, the strawberries are better, or you should have a Buddha bowl, or, things that are beneficial to our body. But we've got this narrative in our head.
Yeah, I think it's important for your listeners to distinguish. There's a difference between mindfulness and obsession. And mindfulness is really more of the awareness. And so I think that mindfulness with food and our health and foods that are nourishing for our bodies is a really good, beneficial thing. I think that's very different from obsessiveness and preoccupation. And I really think the food police is found more in that preoccupation, obsession place. And there's a lot of shame there as well. And I also think another thought there that it's important for people to realize not all foods are nutritionally equal, but the goal is that they would be emotionally equal, meaning I don't feel a sense of pride or self-righteousness because I, ate clean, but with quotes, but I also don't feel a sense of guilt or shame that I ate, the Twinkie that doesn't expire.
That was so good. Like, not nutritionally equal, but emotionally equal.
Yes.
And that really is a game changer for sure.
Yeah. When I think of the food police, I think of shame. And most of the time, shame just keeps us in that behavior that we're trying so hard to get out of.
Do you have any guidance or tips? We're ready to get rid of the food police. Now what? Walk us through this.
So maybe like a practical starting place. I will sometimes have people list either specific foods, I call them quote unquote fear foods, foods that I enjoy eating or at one time enjoyed eating, but there is a fear that I will be out of control. There is a fear that I will gain weight. There is a fear it will affect my health, whatever it may be. And then taking that a step further, looking at each of those specific foods and asking myself, and I would encourage your listeners to actually write this out. What are the rules that I have associated with those foods? And an example might be, a rule might be, don't eat past X p.m. in the evening. Where did that come from? An Instagram influencer. Okay. What are my thoughts and beliefs about that? Well, I believe that if I eat after X p.m., I'm going to gain weight. It's going to be stored directly as fat. Okay. Do I believe this to be true? I don't think so. How do I want to challenge that? Well, my body doesn't technically know what time of the day it is. And, if I'm eating based off of hunger, then it probably would be appropriate to eat regardless of the time. Or if I hadn't had enough to eat throughout the day, it'd be appropriate to eat, no matter what time it is, and all of these different things to begin challenging that narrative.
Yeah. Okay. That's really good. I like that a lot. Tell people how they can connect with you.
Yeah. You can find my website at www.wonderfullymadenutritioncounseling.com. I'm also on Instagram at Wonderfully Made Nutrition, and then on Facebook at Wonderfully Made Nutrition Counseling.
Awesome. And I'll have all of that in the show notes. Okay, Kristin, what's the one simple thing you want us to remember about the food police and challenging the food police?
I think the one takeaway that I want your listeners to remember is you have to first have an awareness that the food police is even there before you can do anything about it. So even if you're like, okay, I understand there is such thing as a food police, I want you to be encouraged that you have done the first step, and that is to be aware of the food police, whether, again, that's internally or externally, because you can't get very far without that awareness piece.
Good point. Great place to start. Okay, that is all for today. Go out there and have a great day.